My mother laughed at my job, called me just a waiter. Unaware, I owned the restaurant chain. The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday night in October, just like it had been the last time I stood on Maple Street. 10 years ago, I was 17 with tears streaming down my face and a duffel bag slung over my shoulder. Tonight, I was 27 with a Mercedes parked around the corner and a net worth that would make my teenage self dizzy. But I wasn't here as Zaria Johnson, CEO of Flamehouse Kitchens. Tonight, I was just Z, a name tag clipped to a black apron, ready to serve tables at my own restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on me. I pushed through the employee entrance of Flamehouse downtown, the flagship location I'd personally designed down to the last light fixture. The familiar sounds hit me immediately: sizzling pans, clinking glasses, the controlled chaos of a dinner rush. My chest tightened. This was my world now, the empire I'd built from nothing. But walking through that back door in server's clothes, I felt like that broken kid again. "You must be the new girl," said Marcus, the general manager I'd hired 6 months ago. He was good at his job, which is why he had no idea who I really was. Only 3 people in the entire company knew I'd be working undercover tonight. My assistant Sarah, my business partner David, and me. "Yeah, that's me. Z," I said, adjusting the apron that felt foreign despite owning dozens of restaurants. "Ready to learn?" Marcus nodded approvingly. "I like that attitude. We're packed tonight, so you'll be shadowing Jessica for the first few hours, then taking a small section if you can handle it." I could handle it. I'd bussed tables at 17 different restaurants between the ages of 17 and 22. I'd scrubbed floors until my hands bled, worked double shifts until I collapsed in my car afterward, saved every penny while other people told me I was wasting my time dreaming of something bigger. The something bigger was now worth $43 million. But none of that mattered tonight. Tonight was about her. I followed Jessica through the dining room, my eyes scanning every face. The restaurant was buzzing, couples on date nights, business dinners, families celebrating. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the girl filling their water glasses had built this place from a single food truck and a prayer. "Table 6 needs their appetizers," Jessica said, balancing 3 plates like it was nothing. "Can you grab the waters?" I nodded and headed to the service station, muscle memory kicking in. Pour, carry, smile, repeat. I'd done this dance 1,000 times before, just never in my own place. That's when I saw the reservation list. Martinez, party of 2, 8:30 p.m. My hands froze around the water pitcher. Martinez. She'd remarried then. Of course she had. The woman who told me I'd never amount to anything, who said I was destined to be just kitchen help, had probably moved on the moment I walked out that door 10 years ago. But it was her. It had to be. Same first name, same phone number I'd memorized as a kid in case of emergencies. The number I'd called exactly once after I left, 3 years ago when I was featured on the cover of Restaurant Business magazine. She'd hung up on me. I steadied myself against the counter. This was why I was here. Not for closure. I'd made peace with my past long ago. Not for revenge either, though I'd be lying if I said part of me didn't want to see her face when she realized who I'd become. I was here because I needed to know if she'd changed. If becoming successful had taught her anything about the girl she'd thrown away. "You okay, honey?" Jessica appeared beside me, concern in her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just nervous," I lied. "First day jitters." She laughed. "Girl, you're handling this better than servers who've been here 6 months. You sure you haven't done this before?" If only she knew. The clock above the bar read 8:15. My mother would be here soon, walking into the restaurant her daughter built, ready to be served by the girl she said would never be anything. I straightened my apron and picked up the water pitcher. Whatever happened next, I was ready for it. Or at least, I thought I was. The front door chimed and my breath caught. Even from across the dining room, I recognized her walk, that particular way she held her shoulders, like the world owed her something. She was older now, gray streaking through the dark hair I'd inherited, but the posture was unmistakable. She was with a man I didn't recognize, average height with kind eyes, and a slightly nervous smile. Her new husband, probably. The replacement family she'd chosen after deciding I wasn't worth keeping. Marcus approached their table with menus, and I watched from behind the service counter as they were seated in Section 4. Not my section, but that could be arranged. I'd spent 10 years wondering what this moment would feel like. All those nights when I was building my first location, when loan officers laughed me out of their offices, when I worked 18-hour days to prove everyone wrong. I'd imagine the scene. The recognition in her eyes. The shock. The realization that the daughter she'd thrown away had become everything she'd said was impossible. But watching her now, settling into her chair like she belonged in the restaurant I'd built from nothing, I felt something I hadn't expected. Sadness. Not for me. I'd grieved the mother I'd lost long ago. I was sad for her because in 10 years, she'd learned nothing. She was still the same woman who'd looked at her 17-year-old daughter and seen only failure. Still the same person who'd chosen cruelty over love, pride over family. I'd hoped she'd grown. I'd hoped that maybe, somewhere in the decades since I'd left, she'd realized what she'd lost. That maybe she'd looked for me, wondered how I was doing, regretted the words that sent me running into the night. But hope was a dangerous thing when it came to people who'd already shown you who they were.
Z.
Jessica touched my arm. You've been staring at table 4 for 5 minutes. You know them? I shook my head, not trusting my voice. They look familiar. Well, snap out of it. We've got orders backing up. I nodded and got back to work, but my eyes kept drifting to that table. My mother was laughing at something her husband said, completely at ease. She had no idea that the girl pouring water 3 tables over was the daughter she'd broken 10 years ago. She had no idea that same daughter now owned every brick, every chair, every light bulb in this place. But she was about to find out. I just had to decide how much of the truth I was ready to tell, and how much of my heart I was willing to risk in the process. The night was young, and the game was just beginning. 20 minutes later, I watched Jessica approach table 4 with their drink orders. My mother barely looked up from her menu, dismissing Jessica with a wave of her hand like she was shooing away a fly. Some things never changed. Excuse me. I heard her voice cut through the dinner chatter, sharp and demanding. This water has spots on the glass. Are you people even washing your dishes properly? My stomach clenched. Jessica's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered with professional grace. Of course, ma'am. Let me get you a fresh glass right away. See that you do. And while you're at it, we've been waiting 15 minutes for someone to take our order. Is this the kind of service you're known for? 15 minutes. I checked my watch. They'd been seated for exactly 8 minutes. Her husband, Robert, I'd heard her call him, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Linda, honey, they're obviously busy tonight. Don't make excuses for lazy service, Rob. She snapped her menu shut. I swear, you can't find good help anywhere these days. These people just don't have any work ethic. These people. My hands tightened around the water pitcher I was holding. 10 years, and she was still the same person who'd looked at her teenage daughter working at a diner and said, "At least now you're where you belong." I watched Jessica hurry back with a new water glass, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. My mother inspected it like she was examining evidence in a court case before giving a dismissive nod. Now, we'd like to order. And please don't mess this up. We have theater tickets at 10. Theater tickets. How refined. How different from the woman who used to scream at me for leaving dishes in the sink. Jessica took their order with remarkable patience, even managing to smile when my mother changed her mind 3 times about her appetizer. The moment she walked away, I intercepted her at the service station. "Hey, I can take over table 4 if you want," I offered, trying to keep my voice casual. "You look like you could use a break from them." Jessica glanced back at the table and sighed. "The woman's a piece of work, but I can handle it. Thanks, though. Seriously, I don't mind. I've dealt with difficult customers before." That was putting it mildly. I'd been dealing with this particular difficult customer my entire childhood. Jessica hesitated, then nodded gratefully. "You know what? They're all yours. Good luck." I smoothed my apron and walked toward table 4, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for, dreaming about, dreading for 10 years. My mother was leaning back in her chair, surveying the restaurant with obvious disdain. Look at this place, Rob. Trying so hard to be upscale, but you can tell it's just another chain restaurant. Probably corporate-owned by some faceless company that doesn't care about quality. If only she knew. I approached their table with a professional smile, the same smile I'd perfected during all those years of serving people who looked right through me. Good evening. I'm Z, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. How are we doing so far? My mother glanced up at me, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought she might recognize something. A flicker of familiarity. Maybe the shape of my face, which was exactly like hers. The eyes I'd inherited from her side of the family. But there was nothing. No recognition, no warmth, no curiosity. Just the same cool assessment she'd give any server. About time, she said. We placed our order 20 minutes ago. I have your order right here, I replied, checking the ticket Jessica had given me. The shrimp cocktail and the Caesar salad? Yes, and I want extra lemon with the shrimp. Not those pathetic little wedges you people usually bring. Real lemon slices. You people. Again. Of course. And can I get you anything else while you wait? She waved me away. Just bring the food. And try not to take all night. I started to turn away, then stopped. I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry, have we met before? You look familiar. My mother barely glanced up from her phone. I highly doubt that. I don't usually frequent places like this. She said it like she was talking about a gas station bathroom. The dismissal hit harder than I'd expected. Not because she didn't recognize me. I'd changed a lot in 10 years, grown into my features, learned to carry myself differently. But because she looked at me like I was nothing. Just another faceless server, invisible and unimportant. Just like she'd looked at me when I was 17 and desperate for her love. I walked back to the kitchen, my hands shaking slightly as I put in their order. The sous chef, Tommy, looked up from his station. You alright, C? You look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that, I muttered. As I waited for their appetizers, I watched my mother from across the dining room. She was laughing at something Robert said, looking relaxed and happy. It struck me that I'd never seen her look that way when I was growing up. Maybe it was Robert's influence, or maybe she'd just learned to be happy without me in her life. The thought should have hurt, but instead, it clarified something for me. I wasn't here to win her back. I wasn't here to prove I was worthy of her love. I was here to prove something to myself. That I'd survived her. That I'd become everything she said I couldn't. That her opinion of me had never mattered as much as I'd thought it did. Their appetizers came up, and I carried them to the table with steady hands. As I set down the shrimp cocktail, my mother examined it critically. These shrimp look small, she complained. Are you sure this is the large portion? Yes, ma'am. That's our standard portion size. She sighed dramatically. I suppose it'll have to do. Though for these prices, you'd think the portions would be more generous. These prices. The prices I'd carefully calculated to ensure my employees made living wages and my ingredients were sustainably sourced. The prices that reflected the quality and care that went into every dish. But to her, I was still just the help. Still just someone whose job was to serve her, to take her criticism, to smile and nod and disappear. I was about to find out just how wrong she was. As I walked away from their table, my mother's voice carried across the dining room like fingernails on a chalkboard. The service here is painfully slow, Rob. I don't know why you insisted on this place. Slow. I glanced at my watch. It had been exactly 12 minutes since I'd served their appetizers. In the restaurant industry, that was actually impressive timing for a busy night. But my mother had always been an expert at rewriting history to fit her narrative. I ducked into the server's station and leaned against the counter, letting the familiar sounds of the kitchen wash over me. The rhythmic chopping of knives, the sizzle of sautéed garlic, the call and response between cooks and expediters. This was my symphony now, the sound of the empire I'd built one plate at a time. It hadn't always been this way. 10 years ago, I'd stood in a very different kitchen, A greasy diner on Highway 45 where the fryer hadn't been cleaned in months and the manager paid us under the table to avoid taxes. I was 18 then, sleeping in my car most nights because I couldn't afford both rent and the business classes I was taking at the community college. My mother didn't know about the business classes. She'd never asked what I was doing with my life after I left. But I remembered every word she'd said that last night. You think you're too good for this family?
Fine.
Go be somebody else's servant. That's all you'll ever be good for anyway. Somebody else's servant. The words had echoed in my head during those early years when I worked 3 jobs and survived on ramen noodles and coffee. When I studied business plans in McDonald's bathrooms during my 15-minute breaks. When loan officers looked at my credit score and laughed me out of their offices. You're dreaming too big, girl. One banker had told me when I pitched my food truck idea. People like you don't own businesses. You work for them. People like me. Young, broke, with no family connections and no safety net. The kind of person my mother had raised me to believe I was destined to be. But I'd proven them all wrong. The first Flamehouse food truck had been a beat-up Chevy with a broken air conditioner and a propane tank that leaked. I'd bought it with every penny I'd saved, plus a loan from a predatory lender who charged 18% interest. My signature dish back then was a simple grilled chicken sandwich with a secret sauce I'd perfected during late-night experiments in my studio apartment. I remembered the first day I'd made $100 in profit. I'd sat in that sweltering truck and cried, not because it was a lot of money, but because it was proof. Proof that I could do something my mother said was impossible. From 1 truck to 2. From 2 trucks to a small storefront. From 1 location to 5, then 10, then 20. Every expansion was another middle finger to everyone who'd told me to know my place.
Z.
Marcus appeared beside me, holding a plate of perfectly plated salmon. Table 4 is asking for you. Something about their entrees. I sighed and straightened my apron. Back to reality. I approached their table with the same professional smile, even though my mother was already shaking her head in disapproval. This salmon is overcooked, she announced before I could even ask how everything was. And the vegetables are under-seasoned. Is your chef even trained? I looked down at the salmon, which was a perfect medium rare with a golden crust. The vegetables, baby carrots, broccolini, and fingerling potatoes, were seasoned exactly as I'd specified in the recipe I'd personally developed. I'm sorry you're not satisfied, I said. Would you like me to have the kitchen prepare something else? What I'd like is for restaurants to hire competent staff, she snapped. But I suppose that's too much to ask these days. Robert shifted uncomfortably. Linda, the food looks fine to me. Don't, she cut him off. You have no standards, Rob. That's why places like this get away with mediocre service. Mediocre service. In the restaurant that had been featured in Food and Wine magazine. The restaurant that had a 3-month waiting list for weekend reservations. The restaurant that employed over 2,000 people across 5 states and had been named Emerging Chain of the Year by the National Restaurant Association. But my mother didn't know any of that. To her, this was just another place to complain about, another opportunity to feel superior to the people serving her. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who would have crumbled under this criticism, who would have internalized every harsh word and carried it like a stone in her chest. That girl had believed her mother's voice was the voice of truth. This woman in front of me, bitter, demanding, cruel to strangers, this was who I'd spent 10 years trying to prove myself to? This was the approval I'd been seeking? Looking at her now, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. She was sitting in a restaurant that represented everything I'd accomplished, everything I'd built from nothing, and all she could see was what was wrong. She was incapable of recognizing excellence because she'd trained herself to look for failure. The same way she'd looked at me. I'll speak to the chef about the seasoning. I lied smoothly. Is there anything else I can get for you tonight? She waved me away with the same dismissive gesture I remembered from childhood. Just bring the check. We have places to be.
Places to be.
Important places, no doubt. Places where she could complain about other servers, other restaurants, other people who were just trying to do their jobs. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure washing over me. Not the closure I'd expected, the triumphant moment of recognition and regret, but something deeper. I'd spent 10 years building an empire to prove her wrong. But watching her now, I realized I'd actually been proving something to myself all along. That I was nothing like her. That success hadn't made me cruel or demanding or dismissive of others. That the girl she'd thrown away had grown into someone who lifted people up instead of tearing them down. The real victory wasn't going to be her shock when she found out who I was. It was knowing that I'd become everything she couldn't, successful, yes, but also kind. I stood at the service station, watching my mother push her barely touched salmon around her plate while complaining to Robert about everything from the lighting to the music volume. Something twisted in my chest, not anger anymore, but a desperate need for certainty. 10 years. 10 years of wondering if she'd changed, if she'd grown, if maybe somewhere deep down she regretted the daughter she'd lost. I told myself I was over it, that her opinion didn't matter. But seeing her here, in the restaurant I'd built, I realized I needed to know for sure. One final test. I found Marcus restocking wine glasses behind the bar. "Hey, can I ask you a favor?" He looked up, surprised. "Sure, what's up? Could you transfer table 4 to my section officially? I know they're not happy with their service, and I'd like a chance to turn their experience around." The lie came easier than it should have. Marcus frowned. "Jessica said they were difficult. You sure you want to deal with that on your first night?" "I'm sure. Consider it a challenge." He shrugged. "All right, but if they give you trouble, let me know. We don't tolerate customers abusing our staff." If only he knew. I waited until their main courses were cleared. My mother had eaten maybe 3 bites and left the rest, naturally, before approaching their table with dessert menus. "How was everything tonight?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Disappointing," my mother said without looking up. The salmon was dry, the vegetables were bland, and frankly, the whole experience has been subpar. The salmon that had been cooked perfectly. The vegetables I'd personally trained the kitchen staff to prepare. The restaurant that had a 4.5-star rating and more awards than I could count. "I'm so sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Sorry that she was incapable of enjoying anything. Sorry that bitterness had poisoned her ability to see beauty. "Can I offer you something from our dessert menu? Perhaps our signature chocolate souffle? It's made fresh to order." She glanced at the menu dismissively. "How long does that take?" "About 20 minutes. 20 minutes? She looked at me like I'd suggested she wait until next Tuesday. Do people not understand that customers have schedules? We have theater tickets, and you've already wasted our entire evening with slow service." Robert cleared his throat gently. "Linda, we have plenty of time."
No, Rob.
"I'm tired of making excuses for incompetence." She turned back to me, and I saw something familiar in her eyes. The same cold satisfaction she used to get when she was about to deliver a particularly cutting remark. "Let me explain something to you, since you clearly don't understand how restaurants work. Here it comes." I braced myself, remembering all the times she'd cornered me in our kitchen at home, ready to explain exactly what was wrong with me and why I'd never amount to anything. When customers pay good money for a meal, they expect quality and efficiency. Not excuses, not delays, not attitude from servers who think they're too good for their jobs. Her voice carried across the dining room, and I noticed other tables glancing over. "You people always want to blame everyone else for your failures instead of taking responsibility." You people. The phrase that had haunted me for 10 years, that had driven me to work 18-hour days and sleep in my car and fight for every dollar and every opportunity. "I understand your frustration," I said carefully. "What can I do to make this right?" She leaned back in her chair, enjoying the moment. "What you can do is learn some work ethic. Stop making excuses and start doing your job properly. And maybe, just maybe, you'll avoid spending your whole life as someone else's servant." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they hurt. I was long past letting her opinions wound me. But because they were almost identical to what she'd said the night I left home. Some people never change. Robert looked mortified. "Linda, that's uncalled for. She's been perfectly professional. Don't enable this kind of behavior, Rob." These people need to hear the truth. They need to understand that there are consequences for not taking pride in your work. She looked me up and down with obvious disdain. Look at her. Probably in her 20s and still waiting tables. No ambition, no drive, no future. No ambition. I thought about the 60-hour weeks I'd worked to build my first location. The business plan I'd rewritten 17 times. The bank meetings where I'd been laughed out of offices. The food truck where I'd nearly passed out from heat exhaustion because I couldn't afford to fix the air conditioning. No drive. I thought about the cooking classes I'd taken at night while working 3 jobs during the day. The industry conferences where I'd been the youngest person in the room by 20 years. The suppliers who'd refused to work with me because I was too small and too risky. No future. I looked around the restaurant, my restaurant, with its custom lighting and carefully curated music and staff who made above-market wages because I believed everyone deserved dignity in their work. You're right, I said quietly. There are consequences for not taking pride in your work. She smiled, thinking she'd won.
Exactly.
Finally, someone who gets it. And there are also consequences for how we treat other people, I continued. For the words we choose when we think no one important is listening. Her smile faltered slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing at all, I said, stepping back from the table. I'll get your check right now. And thank you for the lesson about taking pride in my work. It's been educational. As I walked away, I heard Robert saying something to her in a low, embarrassed voice, but I couldn't make out the words. It didn't matter. I had my answer now.
She hadn't changed.
Not in any way that mattered. She was still the same woman who'd looked at her teenage daughter and seen only failure, who'd chosen cruelty over love, who'd thrown away her own child rather than examine her own heart. But I had changed. I'd become someone who could stand in the fire of her criticism and not burn. Someone who could hear her poison and not let it seep into my soul. The test was over. She'd failed. Now came the reckoning. I walked to the register with steady hands, printing out their check, while my heart hammered against my ribs. $97.33. A number that would have taken me 3 days to earn when I was 17, sleeping in my car, and working at that greasy diner. Now it was less than what I made in the time it took to walk from the kitchen to their table. I set the check down gently, using every ounce of self-control I developed over the past decade. Thank you for dining with us tonight. My mother didn't even look up as she handed Robert her credit card. Finally, I was beginning to think we'd be here all night. They'd been here exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes. I knew because I'd been counting every single one. I processed their payment and returned with the receipt, watching as my mother signed it with an aggressive flourish. No tip, of course. I hadn't expected one. Have a wonderful evening, I said, stepping back as they gathered their things. Not likely, after this experience, she muttered, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. I watched them stand, watched my mother smooth down her dress and check her reflection in her phone screen. She was ready to leave, ready to walk out of my restaurant and back into her life, never knowing that the incompetent server she'd just berated was the daughter she'd thrown away. But I wasn't ready to let her go. Not yet. I caught Marcus's eye across the dining room and gave him the signal we'd arranged earlier, a simple nod that meant now. He looked surprised but walked over immediately. Excuse me, Marcus said, approaching their table with a professional smile. Before you leave, I wanted to personally thank you for dining at Flame House tonight. My mother barely glanced at him. Your thanks would mean more if the service matched the prices. Marcus's smile didn't waver. I understand you had some concerns about your experience. I'll be sure to pass your feedback along to Ms. Johnson, our owner. She takes great pride in ensuring every guest leaves satisfied. Robert looked up with mild interest. Johnson? Is that the Zaria Johnson who was featured in Restaurant Business magazine? My mother froze. I watched the color drain from her face as the name registered, as the pieces started clicking together in her mind. Yes, that's right, Marcus continued, unaware of the bomb he was detonating. Ms. Johnson built this entire chain from a single food truck. Quite an inspiring story, actually. She started with nothing and now owns 59 locations across 5 states. 59. Robert whistled low. That's incredible.
How old is she?
She must have started very young. 27, I believe. Started when she was just 17 or 18. Marcus turned toward the kitchen. Actually, she's here tonight. Let me see if she has a moment to speak with you personally. No, my mother said quickly, her voice sharp with panic. That's not necessary. We really need to go. But it was too late. I was already walking toward their table, still wearing my server's apron, still carrying the dish rag I'd been using to clean tables. My mother's eyes found mine across the dining room, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and finally, pure shock. Good evening, I said, my voice calm and clear. I'm Zaria Johnson. I understand you had some concerns about your experience tonight. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, no sound coming out. Robert looked between us, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. You, she finally whispered, the word barely audible. Yes, I said simply. Me. But you're? She gestured helplessly at my apron, my name tag, the dish rag in my hands. I'm what? A server? Someone's servant. I stepped closer, my voice dropping so only she could hear. You're right. Tonight I served you. I brought you water, took your order, listened to your complaints. Just like you always said I would. Her face was white now, her hands trembling as she gripped the back of her chair. The difference is, I continued, I chose to serve you. In my restaurant. In the building I own with the staff I hired, serving food made from recipes I developed. I smiled, and it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. You spent the evening being waited on by a millionaire, Mom. How does that feel? Zaria, she breathed, and for a moment, just a moment, I heard something that might have been regret in her voice. But then her face hardened, and I saw the exact moment she decided to double down instead of backing down. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice getting louder. You're trying to embarrass me. You set this whole thing up, didn't you? Some kind of sick joke. No joke, I said. Just curiosity. I wanted to see if you'd changed. If maybe, somewhere in the past 10 years, you'd learned to treat people with basic human decency. She laughed then, a harsh, brittle sound that carried across the dining room. Oh, please. You think owning a few restaurants makes you special? You think it changes what you are. And what am I, Mom? The question hung in the air between us. She looked me up and down, her lip curling with the same disgust I remembered from childhood. You're still the same girl who ran away instead of facing reality. Still trying to prove something to people who don't care. The words should have hurt. 10 years ago, they would have destroyed me. Instead, I felt nothing but pity. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. I am trying to prove something, but not to you. Never to you again. I turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back over my shoulder. By the way, that incompetent server who ruined your evening? She's about to go home to a house worth more than you'll make in 10 years. Sleep well, Mom. I didn't wait to see her reaction. I'd spent 10 years wondering what this moment would look like, and now I knew. It looked like walking away with my head held high while she scrambled to make sense of a world that had shifted beneath her feet. Behind me, I heard Robert's confused voice. Linda, what's going on? Who is she? And then my mother, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. She's nobody. Just nobody. Nobody. Even now, even after everything, that was still how she saw me. I pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, where the dinner rush was winding down. Tommy looked up from cleaning his station, concern creasing his features. Hey, you alright? You look like you've been through hell. I laughed, surprising myself. Something like that. How's everything back here? Smooth night. That new salmon recipe is blowing it. We've sold 43 portions already. He paused, studying my face. You sure you're okay? For a new server, you're handling this place like you've been here for years. If only he knew I'd been here, since before the first brick was laid. I'm good, I said, untying my apron. Actually, I'm better than I've been in a long time. The back door chimed, and Marcus appeared with a bewildered expression.
Z? What just happened out there?
That woman looked like she'd seen a ghost when you introduced yourself, and now she's demanding to speak to the real owner. I hung my apron on its hook and turned to face him. Marcus, there's something I need to tell you. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. You're not really a new server, are you?
No.
I'm Zaria Johnson, your actual boss. The kitchen went silent. Tommy dropped his cleaning rag. Two line cooks stopped mid-conversation and stared. Marcus looked like he might faint. But why? Marcus stammered. Why were you working as a server? Personal reasons, I said simply. And to see how the restaurant runs from the ground up. You've been doing an excellent job, by the way. Everyone has. Through the kitchen doors, I could hear raised voices from the dining room. My mother, no doubt, making a scene. Some things never changed. Should I go handle that? Marcus asked, gesturing toward the commotion.
No.
Let me. I walked back into the dining room, no longer hiding behind a server's uniform. I was Zaria Johnson now, owner and CEO, and everyone could see it in the way I carried myself. My mother was standing by their table, her face red with embarrassment and fury. Robert sat slumped in his chair, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Several other diners were openly staring. This is harassment, my mother was saying loudly to anyone who would listen. She set this whole thing up to humiliate me. I want to speak to the real owner, not some delusional girl playing dress up. You are speaking to the real owner, I said calmly as I approached. She whirled around, and for a split second, I saw something that might have been hope flicker across her features. As if she were about to apologize, to acknowledge what she'd lost, to finally be the mother I'd needed all those years ago. Instead, she laughed. That same harsh, mocking sound that had followed me into my nightmares. Oh, please. You think I don't know what this is? Some kind of pathetic revenge fantasy? You probably looked me up, found out where I'd be tonight, and planned this whole charade. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a vicious whisper. You're still that same desperate little girl, aren't you? Still trying to prove Daddy's precious princess was worth something after all. The words were designed to cut, to find the old wounds and tear them open. 10 years ago, they would have worked, but I wasn't that girl anymore. You're right, I said quietly. I did plan this. I came here tonight because I needed to know if you'd changed. If maybe the woman who threw away her 17-year-old daughter had learned something about love, or kindness, or basic human decency in the years since. Her mouth twisted into a sneer. And you haven't. You're still the same person who looked at her own child and saw only failure. Still the same woman who would rather be cruel than admit she was wrong. I took a deep breath, feeling something heavy lift from my chest. So, thank you. Thank you. She looked genuinely confused. For showing me that I don't need your approval anymore. That I never did. I gestured around the restaurant, at the staff who were watching with obvious admiration, at the customers who were starting to recognize what was happening. I built all this not because of you, but in spite of you. And I'm successful not because I proved you wrong, but because I stopped caring if you were right. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. I used to think forgiveness meant reconciliation. That forgiving you meant letting you back into my life, giving you another chance to hurt me. I shook my head. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It just means I'm done carrying your poison around in my heart. Her face crumpled then, and for a moment, she looked older, smaller.
Broken.
Zaria, she whispered, and this time I heard something real in her voice. Regret, maybe. Or just fear of being left behind again. I forgive you, I said and meant it, but that doesn't mean I want you in my life. Some bridges burn for a reason. I turned to Robert, who was sitting in stunned silence. I'm sorry you had to see this. Your meal tonight is on the house. I thank you, he managed. Linda, we should go. My mother stood frozen for a long moment, staring at me like she was trying to memorize my face. Then, without another word, She turned and walked toward the exit. Robert followed, throwing an apologetic glance over his shoulder. I watched them leave through the floor-to-ceiling windows, watched my mother get into a car that would drive her back to whatever life she'd built without me. Part of me, a very small part, felt sad for her. For the woman who was so broken inside that she couldn't love her own daughter. Who was so afraid of being wrong that she'd rather lose everything than admit fault. But mostly, I felt free. Marcus appeared beside me, still looking shell-shocked. Ms. Johnson. I mean, Zaria. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, I told him. Just help me close up. We've got a restaurant to run. I rolled up my sleeves and got back to work, wiping down tables, helping the kitchen staff clean their stations, counting the register. The same work I'd been doing 10 years ago, but different now. Better. Because this time, I was choosing to do it. In my own place, with my own people, building something beautiful instead of just surviving. The girl who'd run away at 17 was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who'd learned that the loudest success wasn't always the most meaningful one. Sometimes the greatest victory was just being happy with who you'd become, apron and all.